2:03 a.m., 48th floor. Olivia Hart leaned back in her leather chair, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. On her desk sat the bankruptcy filing she would sign in 7 hours. Apex Nova, the company she had built from a garage into a billion-dollar empire, was done. But tonight, she was not grieving. She was watching. The night shift janitor, Daniel Brooks, had just pushed his cleaning cart through her office door. Olivia wanted to know one thing. What does a man do when he thinks no one is watching? His answer would change everything. Olivia Hart had not always been the kind of woman who pretended. 23 years ago, she had started Apex Nova in a rented garage with nothing but a second-hand server and a conviction that the world needed smarter cybersecurity infrastructure. No investors believed her. No bank approved her loans. She coded the first prototype herself, sleeping on a folding cot between 18-hour shifts, eating cold rice from styrofoam containers. By the time she was 35, Apex Nova had contracts with 4 Fortune 500 companies. By 40, the company was valued at over $2 billion. Olivia had earned every square foot of this 48th floor office, and now she was about to lose it all. The collapse had not come overnight. It had crept in slowly, like a disease without symptoms. Over the past 14 months, Apex Nova had lost 3 of its largest enterprise clients. Each time, the reason was the same. A competitor called Ridgecore had somehow underbid them with proposals that mirrored Apex Nova's proprietary strategies down to the decimal point. Olivia had questioned her sales team. She had questioned her pricing models. She had hired 2 separate consulting firms to audit her operations. Nothing turned up, but the bleeding continued. And then last quarter, Ridgecore had won the federal defense contract that Apex Nova had spent 18 months preparing for, using a technical framework so similar to Apex Nova's classified submission that it could not have been coincidence. The board of directors had called an emergency session 3 days ago. 7 men and 2 women sat across from Olivia in a glass-walled conference room and told her that Apex Nova was insolvent. The company had 90 days of operating capital left. The recommendation was immediate file for Chapter 11, liquidate non-core assets and negotiate a structured dissolution. The paperwork would be ready by Friday. Today was Friday. The documents sat on Olivia's desk, now 47 pages of legal language that would erase everything she had built. All she had to do was sign her name at the bottom of page 47, and Apex Nova would begin dying on paper. But Olivia was not ready to sign. Not because she had a plan. Not because she believed in a miracle, but because something had been gnawing at her for weeks, a suspicion she could not prove and could not ignore. The pattern of lost contracts, the precision of Ridgecore's bids, the timing of leaked strategies, none of it pointed to bad luck or market competition. It pointed to betrayal. Someone inside Apex Nova was feeding information directly to the enemy, and Olivia had a terrible feeling she knew who it was, though she refused to say the name out loud, not even to herself, not yet, not without proof. So tonight, instead of going home, she had stayed. She had dimmed the office lights, left the bankruptcy filing spread across her desk, and pulled up the company's internal security dashboard on her monitor. Access logs, file transfer records, login timestamps, all of it glowing faintly on the screen. Then she had leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and waited. She was not testing the security system. She was testing something far more fragile, whether the people around her still had any integrity left. It was irrational, perhaps, desperate, certainly, but Olivia had learned long ago that desperation sometimes sees what confidence misses. Daniel Brooks had worked the night shift at Apex Nova for the past 3 years. He arrived every evening at 10 p.m. and clocked out at 6 a.m. His job was simple: vacuum the carpets, empty the trash bins, wipe down the glass walls, restock the restrooms, and stay invisible. He was good at all 5. Before Apex Nova, he had spent 11 years as a systems technician at a mid-sized data firm in Virginia, configuring firewalls, running penetration tests, maintaining network integrity. He had been good at that too, but when his marriage collapsed, it had taken everything with it: his focus, his confidence, his career. He had walked away from the tech industry not because he lacked the skill, but because he lacked the will. Cleaning floors required no decisions, no ambition, no risk. For a man who had lost nearly everything, that simplicity was a kind of mercy. Tonight, Daniel pushed his cart down the 48th floor corridor the same way he always did, quietly, efficiently, without looking at anything that was not his business. Most offices on this floor were dark. The executives left by 7 p.m. at the latest, and the cleaning crew had the run of the building until dawn. But when Daniel reached the corner office at the end of the hall, he noticed the light was still on, dim but on. He opened the door slowly, expecting to find an empty room with a forgotten desk lamp. Instead, he found Olivia Hart slumped in her chair, eyes closed, breathing evenly. A stack of documents fanned out beneath her right hand. Daniel had never spoken to Olivia directly. He had seen her in the hallways a few times, always walking fast, always surrounded by people in suits, always carrying the weight of something enormous on her face. He knew who she was, of course. Everyone in the building did, but to Daniel, she existed in a different world entirely. He did not resent that world. He simply did not belong to it. His job tonight was the same as every night. Clean the office and move on. He stepped inside, carefully pulling his cart behind him, keeping his movement slow so he would not wake her. That was when his eyes caught the monitor. Olivia's screen was still on, casting a pale blue glow across the desk. Daniel did not mean to look, but the display was angled directly toward the door, and the data on it was impossible to miss for anyone who had ever worked in systems administration. It was an access log. Rows and rows of login entries, file transfers, and session timestamps scrolling in real time. Daniel recognized the format immediately. He had spent years reading logs exactly like these. And even from 6 feet away, something about the pattern looked wrong. He should have turned around. He knew that a janitor had no business reading a CEO's security dashboard, but the irregularity was so obvious, so blatant, that it pulled at a part of his brain he had spent 3 years trying to shut off. Several entries showed bulk file downloads occurring between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. over the past several weeks. The files were classified strategic documents, pricing models, client proposals, defense contract blueprints, and every single download was logged under one account. Hale, Chief Operating Officer. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew the name. Marcus Hale was Apex Nova's number 2, the man who appeared on stage next to Olivia at every company town hall. The man whose face was on the lobby screen alongside hers under the words "Leadership You Can Trust." And according to the logs still glowing on Olivia's monitor, Marcus Hale had been accessing and downloading the company's most sensitive files in the middle of the night repeatedly for months. Daniel stood still for a long moment. The vacuum hummed softly from where he had left it near the door. Olivia's breathing remained steady in her chair. Nobody knew he was here. Nobody would ever know what he had seen. He could finish mopping the floor, push his cart to the next office, and forget everything on that screen. By morning, whatever was happening at Apex Nova would be someone else's problem. He was a janitor. This was not his fight. He had a life to protect, small and quiet. But he's getting involved in corporate espionage and boardroom betrayal and things far above his clearance. That was the kind of decision that destroyed people like him. He knew this because he had already been destroyed once. But Daniel also knew something else. He knew what it looked like when a system was being bled from the inside. He had seen it before. Smaller scale, different company, same sickness. And he knew that if those logs were real, then the woman asleep in that chair wasn't failing because she was weak. She was failing because someone she trusted was killing her company in the dark. Daniel looked at Olivia. Then he looked at the screen. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the camera, held it steady, and began photographing the access logs. Every entry, every timestamp, every file name tied to Marcus Hale's account. His hands did not shake. His breathing stayed even. He was not brave. He was not reckless. He was simply a man who had once understood systems well enough to know when one was being sabotaged and who still, despite everything, could not walk away from it. In her chair, Olivia Hart kept her eyes closed. But behind those closed lids, she was wide awake. She had heard the faint click of a phone camera. She had felt the shift in the room's silence when Daniel stopped cleaning and started looking. And for the first time in months, something other than dread moved through her chest. She did not know what Daniel would do with what he had found. She did not know if he would act on or stay silent, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had seen it, and he had not looked away. Daniel did not leave the office immediately after taking the photographs. He stood there for another few seconds, staring at the screen, making sure every image on his phone was clear and legible. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, picked up his mop, and pushed the cart out of Olivia's office without making a sound. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in their flat, indifferent way. He walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, and waited. His face showed nothing, but his mind was already running calculations he had not performed in years, tracing data paths, estimating file sizes, reconstructing the logic of a breach he had only glimpsed for a few minutes. By the time the elevator reached the basement, Daniel had made his decision. He sat down on a metal bench in the maintenance break room, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had not called in over 4 years. Greg Nolan. Greg had been his colleague at the Virginia data firm, a senior cybersecurity analyst who had gone on to work for a private digital forensics company in D.C. They had not spoken since Daniel left the industry, and Daniel was not sure Greg would even pick up. But at 2:37 a.m., with photographs of classified access logs on his phone and the weight of something he could not ignore pressing down on his chest, Daniel pressed the call button. Greg answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. Daniel did not waste time with small talk. He told Greg he needed help verifying something, a pattern in a set of access logs that looked like unauthorized data exfiltration. He said he could not explain where the logs came from or why he had them. He only asked one question: if he sent the images, could Greg tell him whether the pattern was real or whether he was seeing something that was not there? Greg was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Send them." Daniel forwarded the photographs and waited. 12 minutes later, Greg called back. What Greg told him confirmed everything Daniel had feared. The download pattern was textbook corporate espionage, large volume file transfers conducted during off hours routed through an internal account with high-level clearance targeting documents that would only matter to someone preparing a competitive bid. Greg said the timestamps were too consistent to be accidental and too spread out to be a system error. Someone had been methodically extracting strategic data from Apex Nova's servers for at least 3 months, possibly longer. And whoever was doing it knew exactly which files to take, and exactly when to take them. Greg added one more thing before hanging up. If this was real, it was a federal matter. Corporate theft of this scale, especially involving a defense contract, fell under the jurisdiction of the FBI. He told Daniel to be careful, and then the line went dead. Daniel sat alone in the break room staring at his phone. He understood what Greg was telling him. He also understood what it meant for him personally. He was a janitor who had accessed or at least observed a CEO's security dashboard without authorization. He had photographed classified company data on a personal device. If this went wrong, if the evidence was misread or mishandled, he would not be seen as a whistleblower. He would be seen as a trespasser. Apex Nova's legal team could argue that he had violated his employment agreement, breached confidentiality protocols, and accessed systems far beyond his clearance level. He could lose his job. He could face criminal charges. Everything he had carefully rebuilt over the past 3 years, the small apartment, the steady paycheck, the quiet stability, could vanish overnight. But Daniel also knew what he had seen. And he knew that by 900 a.m., the woman on the 48th floor was going to sign away her company to a board that did not know the truth. He picked up his phone again and opened the browser. He searched for the FBI's online tip submission portal, uploaded the clearest photographs, and typed a brief factual description of what the log showed. He included the name on the account, the types of files downloaded, and the approximate timeline. He did not include his own name. Then he submitted the report and put his phone in his pocket. 4 floors above, Olivia Hart opened her eyes. The office was silent. Daniel's cleaning cart was gone, and the faint smell of floor disinfectant lingered near the door. She sat up slowly and looked at her monitor. The access logs were still scrolling. She had heard everything: the soft click of the camera, the careful footsteps retreating, the elevator chime in the distance. What she had not expected was the weight of what those sounds meant. She had set this trap, hoping to catch a thief. Instead, she had watched a janitor risk his livelihood to document a crime that was not his problem. Olivia leaned forward and began reading the same logs Daniel had photographed. Line by line, entry by entry, she followed the trail. It took her less than an hour to see the full picture. Marcus Hale's account had initiated 214 classified file transfers over the past 91 days. The documents included Apex Nova's proprietary pricing algorithms, proprietary technical submission for the Federal Defense Contract Client Relationship Maps, and internal vulnerability assessments. Every download occurred between 1 and 4 a.m., hours when the building was empty except for security and cleaning staff. Olivia cross-referenced the dates of the downloads with the dates Apex Nova had lost each major client. They matched. Every single time Ridge had outbid them, it had happened within days of a bulk download from Marcus' account. The company had not been outcompeted. It had been hollowed out from the inside by the one person Olivia had trusted more than anyone else in the building. She sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. Marcus Hale had been with her for 15 years. He had been her first hire when Apex Nova moved out of the garage and into a real office. He had stood beside her at every press conference, every board meeting, every crisis. She had given him the title of Chief Operating Officer because she believed no one understood the company's DNA better than he did. And all that time, or at least for the past 3 months, he had been selling that DNA to the highest bidder. Olivia did not cry. She did not slam her fist on the desk. She simply sat in the silence of her office and let the betrayal settle into her bones like cold water. By 6:30 a.m., the building began to wake. Lights flickered on across the lower floors. The lobby security desk changed shifts. Elevators started moving with their usual morning rhythm. At 7:45, Marcus Hale walked through the front entrance wearing a charcoal suit and carrying 2 cups of coffee. He rode the elevator to the 48th floor, knocked twice on Olivia's door, and stepped inside with a sympathetic expression that he had clearly rehearsed. He set one of the coffees on her desk and said, "Long night." His voice was smooth, concerned, perfectly calibrated to sound like a man who cared. Olivia looked at him and felt something cold move through her stomach. She picked up the coffee, thanked him, and said nothing about the logs. Marcus sat down across from her and began talking about the board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. He reviewed the bankruptcy timeline, the asset liquidation plan, and the proposed communication strategy for employees and shareholders. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who had already accepted the outcome, or Olivia now realized a man who had engineered it. She watched his mouth move and wondered how many of these words he had practiced in front of a mirror. At 8:15, the board members began arriving. They filed into the glass-walled conference room one by one, setting down leather folders and tablets and bottled water. The mood was grim but procedural. This was not a debate. This was a formality. The documents were already printed. The signature lines were already flagged with yellow tabs. All that remained was Olivia's pen on the page. The board chair, a silver-haired man named Richard Ames, opened the session by thanking everyone for their commitment to the company and expressing his regret that it had come to this. His words were careful, diplomatic, and entirely hollow. Olivia sat at the head of the table with the bankruptcy filing open in front of her. 47 pages. Page 47, the signature line. Marcus sat 2 chairs to her left, his hands folded, his expression, a masterpiece of practiced sorrow. Olivia picked up her pen. She could feel the room tighten around her. 9 pairs of eyes locked onto her hand as it hovered over the page. Richard Ames leaned forward slightly. Marcus uncrossed and recrossed his legs. The clock on the wall read 8:55. Olivia lowered the pen toward the page. The tip touched paper, and then the conference room door opened. A woman in a dark navy suit stepped inside, followed by 2 men in identical suits. She held up a badge and introduced herself as Special Agent Lauren Cross of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She said they were there to execute a search warrant on the digital accounts and office of Marcus Hale, Chief Operating Officer of Apex Nova, in connection with an ongoing investigation into corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. The room went silent, not the polite silence of a meeting, the airless silence of a detonation. Marcus Hale did not move. His hands remained folded. His expression shifted from practiced sorrow to something harder, something that looked like calculation. He turned to Olivia and said, "What is this?" His voice was no longer smooth. Olivia met his eyes, but did not answer. Richard Ames stood up from his chair and began asking the agents what authority they had to interrupt a private board session. Agent Cross handed him a copy of the warrant without breaking stride. She turned to Marcus and asked him to step out of the conference room. For a moment, nobody moved. The board members looked at each other, then at Olivia, then at Marcus. The bankruptcy filing sat open on the table, unsigned. Olivia's pen rested on the page where she had set it down. She did not pick it up again. She was not thinking about the document anymore. She was thinking about the fact that everything, the evidence, the warrant, the timing rested on photographs taken by a night shift janitor in a dark office at 2:30 in the morning. If those photographs were not enough, if the FBI found the evidence insufficient, if Marcus' lawyers moved fast enough, then the entire thing would collapse, and Olivia would not just lose her company. She would be sued for defamation by her own COO, destroyed in the press, and remembered as a CEO who accused her most loyal executive of treason based on the word of a man who cleaned floors for a living. The room held its breath. Agent Cross placed her hand on the conference room door and looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Now, please." Marcus stood slowly. He buttoned his jacket with steady hands, looked once more at Olivia with an expression that was no longer sorrow or calculation, but something closer to contempt, and walked out of the room without a word. The two agents followed him. The door closed behind them, and the silence that remained was the heaviest thing Olivia had ever felt. The conference room stayed frozen for what felt like a full minute after the door closed. 9 board members sat in their chairs staring at the space Marcus Hale had just occupied. The bankruptcy filing remained open on the table, the yellow signature tab untouched. Richard Ames was the first to speak. He asked Olivia, quietly but directly, whether she had known this was going to happen. Olivia looked at him and said, "I knew something was wrong. I did not know the FBI would walk through that door." It was the truth. She had set a trap to catch a thief. She had not expected someone else to spring it. Over the next 72 hours, the situation unfolded with the mechanical precision of a federal investigation. Agent Lauren Cross and her team seized Marcus Hale's office computer, his company-issued phone, and his access credentials. A forensic audit of Apex Nova's servers confirmed everything the access logs had shown. 214 classified file transfers over 91 days, all originating from Marcus' account, all targeting documents directly related to contracts that Ridge had subsequently won. The digital trail did not stop at downloads. Investigators found encrypted emails between Marcus and a senior vice president at Ridgecore, a man named Terrence Wyatt, detailing a compensation arrangement tied to each contract Ridgecore secured using Apex Nova's stolen data. Marcus had not acted out of ideology or grievance. He had acted for money. The payments totaled just under $3 million, routed through a shell company registered in Delaware. When the evidence was presented to the board, Richard Ames called a second emergency session. This time, the tone was different. The bankruptcy filing was pulled from the table. The liquidation plan was shelved. Apex Nova's legal counsel filed an immediate injunction against Ridgecore, citing theft of trade secrets and unfair competitive practices. Within 2 weeks, the federal defense contract that Ridgecore had won, the one built on Apex Nova's stolen technical framework, was suspended pending review. Within a month, 2 of the 3 enterprise clients who had left Apex Nova reached out to reopen negotiations after learning that Ridgecore's pricing advantage had been built on stolen intelligence, not innovation. The company was not saved overnight. There were still debts to restructure, trust to rebuild, and a gaping hole in the executive team where the COO had once stood. But the free fall had stopped. Apex Nova was no longer dying. It was bleeding, but it was standing. And for the first time in over a year, Olivia Hart could look at her company's future without seeing a cliff. But the thing that stayed with Olivia, the thing she could not stop thinking about in the days after Marcus was escorted out, was not the betrayal. She had already begun processing that, folding it into the long list of painful lessons that came with running a company for 2 decades. What stayed with her was Daniel Brooks, a man who had cleaned her office 300 nights a year for 3 years, whose name she had never learned, whose face she would not have recognized in a crowd. He had stood in her office at 2:30 in the morning, seen something that was not his responsibility, and made a choice that put everything he had at risk, not for money, not for recognition, not because anyone asked him to. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, and because he was still, despite everything life had taken from him, the kind of man who could not look away from a wrong he knew how to name. Olivia found Daniel on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the FBI raid. He was in the basement maintenance room organizing cleaning supplies on a metal shelf. She had asked building security where the night shift janitor stationed on the upper floors could be found, and they had pointed her downstairs with confused expressions. She walked into the room without knocking. Daniel turned around and saw her standing in the doorway, the CEO of the company still wearing her blazer from whatever meeting she had just left, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. She told him she knew what he had done. She told him she had been awake that night, that she had heard the camera, that she had watched him choose to act when every rational calculation said he should walk away. Daniel did not say anything for a moment. He said, "I did not do it for the company." Olivia asked him what he meant. Daniel looked at the shelf of cleaning supplies beside him and then back at her. "I did it because I used to be someone who understood those systems," he said. "And when I saw what was on that screen, I could not pretend I did not understand it. That would have been a different kind of lie than the ones I was already telling myself." Olivia did not fully understand what he meant by that, and she did not press him to explain. Instead, she made him an offer. She said Apex Nova was creating a new internal division, something she was calling Ethics and Integrity Operations. Its purpose would be to monitor internal data access flag anomalies and ensure that the kind of breach Marcus had executed could never happen again. She needed someone to lead it. Not a consultant, not an outsider, someone who understood systems from the ground up. Someone who had proven that their judgment could be trusted when no one was watching. She asked Daniel if he would take the position. Daniel looked at her for a long time. He did not say yes immediately. He asked whether she was offering him the job because she felt she owed him something. Olivia shook her head. "I'm offering you the job because you were the only person in this building who saw the truth and acted on it," she said. "Everyone else, including me, was either blind or afraid. You were neither." Daniel thought about it for 2 more days. Then he accepted. 1 year later, Apex Nova held its annual company-wide address in the main auditorium on the ground floor. The room was full of engineers, salespeople, analysts, support staff, maintenance crew, security guards. Olivia stood at the podium in a black blazer, no notes in front of her. The company had recovered, revenue was climbing. The federal defense contract had been reinstated. 3 new enterprise clients had signed on in the past quarter. Ridgecore was under federal investigation, and Marcus Hale was awaiting trial on 12 counts of corporate espionage and wire fraud. The numbers were good, but Olivia did not talk about numbers. She talked about a night. She told the room that 1 year ago at 2 o'clock in the morning she had sat in her office pretending to sleep. She said she had done it because she no longer trusted anyone. Not her board, not her executive team, not even herself. She had wanted to test whether integrity still existed somewhere inside the walls of her company, or whether everything she had built had rotted from the inside out. And then she told them about the man who had walked in with a mop and a cleaning cart and had seen something on her screen that most people in the building, people with MBAs and corner offices and stock options, had either missed or ignored for months. She did not name Daniel directly. She did not need to. Most of the company already knew the story by then. What she said instead was this: "I spent 23 years building this company. And I nearly lost it because I believed that the people who mattered most were the ones with the biggest titles. I was wrong. Titles do not define character. Character defines true value. The person who saved Apex Nova was not in the boardroom. He was not on the executive team. He was not on any org chart that I had ever looked at. He was the man who cleaned my office at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he saw what none of us were willing to see. Olivia gripped the edges of the podium and let her eyes move across the room. I pretended to sleep that night to test someone's integrity, she said. But the truth is, he was the one who woke me up. Who? He woke me up from the kind of arrogance that comes so quietly you do not even know you are carrying it. The arrogance of believing that leadership means being the smartest person in the room, when really it means being the one who sees the value in every person in the room. The auditorium was quiet, not the performative quiet of corporate events where people wait politely for the next slide. It was the real kind, the kind that comes when someone says something that lands in a place people did not expect to be touched. Daniel Brooks sat in the fourth row wearing a gray suit that still felt unfamiliar on his frame. He did not stand. He did not wave. He simply sat there, hands resting on his knees, looking at the woman on the stage, who had once been asleep in a chair while he mopped her floor. He had spent 3 years being invisible. He had spent 3 years telling himself that invisibility was enough, that staying small and staying safe was a reasonable trade for everything he had lost. But sitting in that auditorium, hearing Olivia Hart tell a room full of people that the most important decision made in the history of Apex Nova had been made by a janitor with a phone camera. At 2:30 in the morning, Daniel understood something he had been avoiding for a long time. He had not stopped being a systems technician when he picked up a mop. He had only stopped believing he still was one. And believing it again, not because someone told him to, but because he had proven it to himself in the dark with no one watching, was the thing that finally brought him back. A company is not saved by strategy. It is saved by the people who still have integrity. When the lights are off and the doors are closed, that is the only infrastructure that never fails.